So Sasha will tell you that this is probably about the fifth of these You've Got Questions sermons times that I've done in the time that I've been a minister and a preacher at a church. We started this back in Kalispell, and it was such a hit. I brought it last summer, and it was just phenomenal. And it was really interesting to see the differences in the type of questions that were asked between the 8:30 service and the 10 o'clock service. The 8:30 service asked really hard-hitting theological, biblical questions, and the 10 o'clock service asked questions like, when did we change our logo? So it was very interesting, very, very interesting. And I also, this time around, solicited information or questions on Facebook and through Twitter, and received a couple of emails and tweets and Facebook posts. So hopefully if there's a lull in our asking here, I'll turn to some of the ones that we received over Facebook. And since a couple of the people who Facebooked me or emailed me or tweeted me this week are in the room, I'll try to get to those today as well. So let's start off. I'll solicit one and then go to one of the ones that I received electronically. Rich Wayman. Okay. Gosh darn it. All right, so this is the way we'll do this. We'll repeat the question before we... Rich's question was, what are my recommendations for living a spiritual life in the modern age? What a fantastic question. So one of the ways, Rich, that I would recommend that people... one of the things I need to do, because one of the things I am really bad at is spending like 15 minutes on one question. So let me just set this up real quick. We'll try to answer each one of these in 2 to 3 minutes, so more questions can be asked. So my recommendations, Rich, for leading a spiritual life in the modern age is probably twofold. One has a foot kind of rooted in antiquity, and one has a foot rooted in modernity, or I should say post-modernity. So let's start there. One of the precepts of post-modernity is to accept that there is no universal answer to anything. And I think once we accept that there is no universal answer to anything out there, then we no longer have to hold on to that we're right and they're wrong. And once you step out of the dichotomy of the I'm right and you're wrong kind of tension and relationship, then you can actually learn to live together and be in relationship and have, be reconciled to one another. It really is an act of freedom to step outside of this into sort of what I would call a postmodern reality. But yet there's things in our scriptures and in our tradition that have obviously stood the test of time and still mean a lot to people these days. I don't really think that you can take biblical norms for marriage or a biblical norm for an economy and take them out of a 3rd century BCE or a 1st century CE world and just plop them into a 21st century United States and expect the economy to go up or expect every marriage to be happy. Things that worked sometimes in the 1st century just don't work in the 21st century. And yet there are things that still seem to work, which is sort of the shorthand would be to slow down, take time for yourself, and give back to others. I think if people took some intentional time to slow down in their life, and that means different things to different people. I'm not one of these, everybody needs to unplug. And yet at the same time, unplugging and allowing us to exist in sort of a natural world sometimes actually enhances the heart and enhances the spirit. The second one of those was, what did I say? Slow down. Save time for yourself. So slow down, save time for your, thank you. That's obviously I'm practicing this so well myself that it just comes right off the top of my head. Slow down, take time for yourself. So a lot of times we are in such a busy world especially in the 21st century, United States, and every single second of our day seems to be kind of like regimented and there seems to be another thing that we have to get to. And I know I fall into that trap that things that are actually happening at 7 p.m. really affect my morning and I'm stressed out, I have anxiety, I'm not prepared, whatever it is. And so taking some time for myself and saying, when that time comes at 7 p.m. for the Ministry for Personnel and Resource Committee, like I'll be present for that and I'll be ready for that. but can I take some time for myself now so I can sort of be aware of how I'm feeling and what's going on. And then finally, the last one is giving back to others. I think all the major spiritual traditions sort of laud giving to others as a way to lead an honorable spiritual life. And so again, that's done in a number of different ways for different people. Some people want to do that through what I call white-collar giving, because maybe physically or time-wise they're not able to physically go to a place and sort of help or give back or volunteer. Others kind of do it in a blue-collar way, which is they want to get their hands dirty, they want to get their knees wet, they need to, all these type of things. And so whichever one works for you, either to kind of do a white-collar or a blue-collar giving back, I think giving to others is a really important way to lead a spiritual life in the 21st century. Thank you, Rich. That was a great start. Not too hard, not too soft. That was good. So Jim Viskerna, I'm going to ask Jim emailed me. And Jim asked, what does the Bible, and I air quotes here, what does the Bible truly say about a man lying with a man that is famously quoted in Leviticus? In 3 minutes. Thanks, Jim. Actually, this is actually a very easy one for me to sort of answer in 3 minutes or less. So basically what Jim is asking about there are 2 verses in the book of Leviticus, which is chapter 18 and 20 in Leviticus, which basically say the same thing twice, which is to say that if a man lies with a man, then they should, that's an abomination, and that their sin is upon them, and then they should be put to death. Which seems to be a really brutal thing to say about any person or people, and is one of the scriptures which has traditionally been called clobber verses because they've been used to clobber, quote unquote clobber, the gay and lesbian community. So let me address one thing first. There is nothing in the Bible that says anything in terms of there being a prohibition against women lying with women. So if you are a lesbian, you are fine. Secondly, let me share with you everything that Jesus ever said about gay relationships. There you go. Jesus said absolutely nothing about gay relationships, about a quote-unquote gay lifestyle, about men lying with women lying with women. And since we as Christians adhere to the principle that Jesus was the fulfillment of the law, then I think we can easily say, Jim, that the law has been fulfilled and the law has nothing to say about a man lying with a man. Lastly, let me say that the book of Leviticus really is a life code for, again, the 2nd or 3rd century BCE. And there are a lot of things that were prohibitions in the 2nd, 3rd century BCE, which again would not apply to the 21st century. Looking around this room, according to the book of Leviticus, all of you are sinners. Because I bet most of you here are wearing blended clothing. So one of the scriptures, one of the verses in Leviticus says that clothing of blended threads is not permitted to be worn. So any of you who are wearing something that is 30% cotton and 25% polyester and 15% rayon, sinners, all of you. So there are certain things in the book of Leviticus that if we take them out of context and try to apply them to a 21st century world, it just doesn't work. Unfortunately, our brothers and sisters who like to apply these proof-texted verses from the book of Leviticus, I think if they took a more kind of wider approach, they would understand that, that it's not fair to take certain things out of context. So that's my short answer to truly understand. But I think the easiest way for Christians to get around this is to say Jesus is the fulfillment of the law, and Jesus said nothing. But what Jesus did say had a lot to do about loving our neighbor and loving ourselves. So I think that's the model that we should apply to our lives instead of proof texting things from, a book 4,000 years ago. All right, you're welcome. Is there another question? Yes, Chris. Right. You should come to our children's moment, Chris. We are not. The tribe is doing fine. In fact, the tribe has gotten a little big. Another question from inside the room? Yes, Bill. Mm-hmm. Sure. Okay, so is your question, do I think Jesus was a zealot? Okay, so Bill has been reading the book Zealot by Reza Aslan, which I know many of us in the church have read on our own. And I think what I understand, Bill, you're asking is there a difference between Jesus the Christ and maybe the historical Jesus of Nazareth? And did the historical Jesus have a fairly radical political bent to him? Is that the question you're asking? Okay, all right. So I have not read Zealot, though much of the scholarship which Reza Aslan uses in Zealot is fairly familiar to me. I think one of the gifts, just real quick, one of the gifts of Reza Aslan as a writer is he takes very complex theological and historical ideas and he's able to synthesize them and write them in a way that those of the common tongue are able to appreciate. He did the same thing on his book on Islam. Which I cannot recommend to you enough. If you have questions about Islam, his book, No God But God, is one of the best books on Islam I've ever read. But according to answer your question, I think there is a difference between the historical Jesus and Jesus the Christ in the sense that when you kind of deify a human being for 2,000 years, there is a chance that person really has a few steps removed from the historical being. The historical Buddha is not the spiritual Buddha. The historical Muhammad is not the prophet Muhammad. For that matter, the historical Johnny Cash isn't the God of the hipsters, in the 21st century. Like, we've already started to deify people in our, even in our own times, and we're really not that far away. So who was the historical Jesus? That's a great question, which scholars have been asking for the last 150 years. There have been, from what I understand, about 3 different quests for the historical Jesus, and it's incredibly difficult to parse out who the person was, because there are no historical texts about Jesus of Nazareth. There are only religious texts, those that are found in our Bible, and then others, heretical texts, which would be heretical texts that have circulated throughout the centuries. And that's the only information that we have about Jesus. So that's why I would say that all of this is a leap of faith. Because we have to go on faith what it is that we believe about this historical human being, because we really don't have any definitive answer about who he was. We have the tradition, and we have the story, and there are certain things that we can say, I think, with some certitude in terms of like when he lived. There are enough sort of, how can I say, there are enough standards out there, and there's enough things that sort of kind of fit together that we can say for certainty. But this is one reason why religious life is a life of faith. I have faith that what I've been told about Jesus is true, even though they might not be historically accurate. Does that make sense? Okay. Look at that. Okay, we got time for one more question. Geez, 9 o'clock is rolling right along. Does anyone have a question? If not, I'll go to Jones. Well, I want to go to, you wrote me, Joan, and I want to be able to answer your question. But I think this one is important. Can I go with this one? Okay. So Joan's question that she emailed me through Facebook, because she learned how to post, and I'm very proud of you, Joan, is, have you personally experienced a thin place phenomena, for example, at the bedside of a dying person, and do you believe in life after death as a certainty? Let me answer the second part of that question first. Yes. I do believe in life after death with certainty. But as I just mentioned to Bill, that's why this religious life is a life of faith. I have faith in a life after death with certainty, though I have no physical proof. But I believe with my whole being that there is life after death. Now, if you ask me what that life after death is, I don't know exactly. It seems incredibly cruel to me that if someone had an adventurous spirit and that they were sort of a nomad in their life and it was the road where they had their greatest joy, that they would be stuck in heaven for eternity. And so in that way, reincarnation sounds fairly good for a person who has an adventurous soul. But those of us who are tired and weary and really need a place to rest, heaven, as it's described in the Christian literature, sounds incredibly appealing. And I think I've landed that second part. I was a nomad as a child, and Sasha and I have been somewhat nomads as adults, and I'm ready to sleep and rest for a while. I do. There'll be harps and things, and I have questions for Peter. But have I personally experienced a thin place phenomenon? That's a great question. And I would say no, not as the way it's been. So those of you might be asking, what is a thin place? A thin place is one of either is a spiritual experience or an actual physical place where the line between the spiritual and the material world is so thin that you can almost kind of have one foot in either or both. And I'm going to say, Joan, that I have never personally experienced a thin place phenomenon, though I have family and I have friends and I have congregants who definitely have. There was a woman in my church in Kalispell named Betty Powell who was from Edinburgh, Scotland, and she spoke about visiting the Isle of Iona, which historically has been thought of as a thin place, one of those geographical regions where the spiritual and the material world is thin, and people who visit Iona say to have, often claim to have a spiritual experience. Maybe Sheila has been, and she can share with you if she had one of those. But Betty Powell would often say that in her dreams, she could see her mother and her husband and ancestors who had passed away. And she'd come and ask me, do you think I'm crazy? And I was like, no, you're not crazy. I think many of us have those experiences with our ancestors and our loved ones who have passed on and gone before us. So I definitely believe in a life after death and believe in a thin place phenomenon, though I have to say that I've never personally experienced one myself.